Okay, have it set up for Facebook Live. All right. Okay, David, are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And we are recording.
Great.
Thank you for joining us this evening for our online career workshop hosted by the University of Arizona Alumni Career and Professional Development Lab. I'm Cindric Steptoe, Director of the UA Alumni Career Lab, and I'm broadcasting live from beautiful Tucson, Arizona. I'm excited for tonight's webinar, Capitalizing on Your Accomplishments with Dr. David Petrove. This webinar is a part of a free alumni career webinar series from the Alumni Career Lab that provides monthly conversations with experts about a variety of industry and professional development topics. Today's presentation is being recorded and it will be archived on the Alumni Association's website for you to access on demand. Find a link to that and more at arizonaalumni.com/careers. We are also streaming live on Facebook Live tonight on the University of Arizona Alumni Association page. Go like our page if you haven't done so already. Questions are welcome anytime during tonight's event. Type them into the chat box on the right side of your screen whenever you think of them. David would answer questions at the end of the webinar. If you're on Facebook tonight, please type your comments into the questions in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you. Now, a little bit about our speaker. David Petrove has over 19 years of experience in the area of career counseling and coaching, assisting clients in identifying their life's work. He has a Master of Education in Counseling and Guidance from the UA and a PhD in Education from the UA. He specializes in career coaching and transition coaching. Certified in MBTI Steps 1 and 2 and is a certified global development facilitator. He's presented a variety of work-related topics such as self-marketing, interviewing, job search strategies, and resume writing. I'd like to give a huge thanks to David for taking the time to be with us tonight and share his expertise with the UA alumni. Now I'll turn things over to David, who will tell you a little bit more about himself and walk you through his presentation. Thank you, David. Over to you.
All right. Thank you, Cindric, and a good evening to all of you who are in the listening group. And as Cindric was saying, my background is in career coaching, and that was the focus of my doctoral dissertation while I was at the U of A. So I'm going to take what I've learned and I'm going to share that with you this evening, especially as it relates to capitalizing on your accomplishments. So as we begin today's workshop, ask yourself, just how comfortable are you in sharing your achievements or accomplishments with others? Were you raised to keep a low profile and stay under the radar? Or were you told to make sure that people around you knew your value? How have your beliefs been affecting the way that you act in the workplace? And how do you keep track of all that you've contributed? And what's the best way to share that? Well, we'll be looking at that today in our webinar. Okay, Cindric. Oh, all right. A little bit of a technical difficulty there that we've resolved. So When you're talking about your achievements, you're really talking about your results. And you want to let your results do the talking. And this is what the focus will be on today's workshop. So what we're hoping to accomplish are 3 different objectives. When accomplishments should be recognized, what the 5 components of an accomplishment statement are, and how to write a PSR, which is a problem, solution, result statement. And during today's presentation, we'll be opening the chat box for your input as we go through the various stages of writing a PSR. So it's always important to begin with an understanding of the topic of discussion. So let's begin by defining what an accomplishment is and giving some examples of what that might be. Well, an accomplishment is an action taken in response to a problem that results in a positive change. And in this case, the change will be in the workplace, although you can certainly have accomplishments in other areas of your life, such as with your health, with your finances, maybe in sports that you're involved in. And some examples of this might be a recognition for executing a plan, maybe contributing to a process at work, or a product or service that benefited the company. So think about an accomplishment from your past. How did you feel about it? Were you excited, proud, satisfied? These are all ways that you know that you've achieved something in the workplace. And why exactly would it be important to track your accomplishments? You certainly have enough on your plate already. Is this just one more thing that you're being asked to do? Well, there's a lot of value in tracking your accomplishments. It can provide a concrete record of your contributions to the company. Maybe you're going to use it to justify a request for a raise or a promotion. It can document your effectiveness as an employee when writing your resume. It can document your achievements as part of your work performance evaluation. It can serve as a plan to reach resolution on any work-related problems. And it's also a great self-esteem and self-confidence builder, something to look back on and say, wow, I did a great job. So, Cindric, how about if you open up the chat box and we'll see if our listeners have any other ideas about why it would be important to track their accomplishments. So go ahead and type those in once we get that up there.
Yep, the chat box is open.
All right. Any thoughts by our listeners?
None yet.
Okay.
You want to restate the question for them so they can hear it?
Sure. So the question is, what are some other ways in which you believe it's important to track your accomplishments besides the ones that I've listed?
Here's one from Regina. Reasons to track accomplishments in times of funding scarcity. Accomplishments can help to justify your place in the company or / department.
Absolutely. Great way to justify maintaining your position, especially if they're looking at cutbacks. Any other thoughts?
That's the only one so far.
All right, so we'll move on. If something else comes up for you, then certainly you can introduce that. So today we're going to learn how to use the PSR as a tool. So why would you even want to do this? Well, it's important to look at a PSR because you may be sitting in an interview and the interviewer across from you asks you a question about a situation that may have occurred 5 years or more in the past. And the response that you give may be very appropriate for the question being asked. So would you be able to remember numbers and dates if it's that far back? By keeping track of your accomplishments, it's a great way to review prior to going in for an interview. So let's begin by looking at what the problem is in a PSR. Well, typically in a problem, there's a gap between what is happening and what should be happening, requiring some action to take place in order to remediate it. So one way that you know that a problem exists is in the emotional climate that exists either within yourself or in your surroundings. So typically when there's a problem, you're experiencing tension, stress, pressure, and maybe even fear. So let's look at some examples of what problems might be. There could be morale issues. Maybe you're dealing with late shipment arrivals, or you have to onboard new employees, or perhaps a new piece of equipment has arrived and your responsibility is to get people up to speed in its mastery. So what I'd like for you to do, not in the chat box, but where you are, if you have access to this, write down a problem that you were faced with in the workplace that affected the company. And what we're going to do is we're going to add the different layers as we go through the PSR, and we'll actually create a PSR toward the end of today's workshop. So think about a situation that you were dealing with. Was it a morale issue? Was there a problem with shipping? Maybe something related to employees or equipment? Go ahead and write that out to the best of your memory. And as you're writing that, we'll move on to the solution involved. Now, typically the solution is an action taken to resolve the problem. Now, where a problem tends to be singular in nature, solutions can be multiple. Now, as we talked about the emotions that are surrounding a problem, typically when you get into the solution, there's a sense of relief or hope. So there are many different ways that people approach solving problem solving. So some people like to outline and plan. These are people who prefer structure. So these are the individuals that you might see creating a flow chart in order to demonstrate how they would solve the problem. Then there are those who like to figure out what needs to be done, and they create a roadmap for how to get from point A to point B to point C. And this can be A being the problem, B the solution, and C the result. Still others like to define specifications. So these are what we refer to as detail people. There are those who like to begin by mobilizing their resources. What personnel are required to solve the problem? What are the financial constraints that we might have as we move forward? There are those who like to articulate a vision as part of problem solving. They're the bigger picture people. There are still others who like to explore options, and these are the people who like to brainstorm. And there are others who discover new ways of seeing things through problem solving, and this is through what we call out-of-the-box thinking. Now, you may use one approach, or you may use a combination. For myself, I definitely am a person who likes to create structure with details and then use brainstorming as a way to make sure that I've covered all my bases. So in having this discussion, look at the problem that you wrote and now add the solution that you applied next to it. Now we move on to the result. Now, the result is the consequence or outcome of the solution or solutions applied. And what's important to recognize here is that results can either be positive or negative in nature. So for instance, maybe the problem was that you needed to change the current organizational structure. And so the solution that you applied was to develop a strategic plan which would take place over the next 6 months. The result was, after that 6-month period passed, that plan wasn't achieved. Well, what happened? Maybe it was unrealistic to begin with. Maybe your expectations weren't quite clear, or that possibly the timeline that you decided upon really didn't match the ability to come up with that result. Or maybe some external event occurred, like a takeover or a buyout. And so what's really important to think about here is what was learned. You always want to take this into consideration in terms of this entire process. What is it that you can take forward from the problem solution result into future problems that might occur? So go ahead and add your result on what you've been monitoring. And again, we will be looking at those a little bit later. One of the areas that I've added is the skills. So typically you'll have workshops to talk about just the PSR in general, but I've found that it's really important to identify the skills and the traits that are also associated with this. And a skill is an ability developed through training, experience, and knowledge. It can include writing, public speaking, troubleshooting mechanical problems, even applying first aid. And one type of skill that you may be familiar with is what we call a natural talent. And a natural talent is a skill that basically you were born with. And so therefore you find it rather effortless. So these are skills that people have, for instance, with standing in front of an audience. People seem perfectly at ease in terms of their ability to work with a group. Maybe it's joke telling. Have you ever talked about people who just seem to have a natural sense of humor? So if you're not sure what your skills are, you can always ask people around you what they notice. So Cindric, I'd like you to open the chat box and see what other skills people might identify based upon what we've just discussed.
It's open. No takers yet.
Does that mean that no one here has any skills? Think about all the skills that are associated with communication. That's pretty broad. Or mechanical.
People skills, language skills. Those are two that just came in.
All right. How about writing? How about the ability to take a piece of equipment apart and put it back together again?
Ability to get people to work together is another one that was stated.
All right. Good. So keep thinking about the kinds of skills that you might have, especially as they relate to the problem that you identified. What kinds of skills were in place as you work through that to get to the other side? So next, we have traits. And traits are what we refer to as a distinguishing feature or quality that's separate from a task. So traits can involve tenacity, creativity, innovation, and they're more descriptive than they are behavioral. So now let's open the chat box and see what traits you might identify.
Organized is one that was listening skills, organized trait.
Okay, so
Persuasive.
Persuasive, great. Persuasive is definitely a trait. Organized is a trait. Again, then what you do with it becomes the skill. Any other traits?
Self-starter.
Okay.
Activator trait, people who are able to act on an idea.
All right. So as you think about these traits, think about 3 traits that specifically describe you. Obviously, they won't.
Analytical is one of just type.
Okay. All right. So is your trait being analytical, creative, responsive? So I want to refer to a TV show that I watched growing up. Believe it or not, this was back in the 50s. And it was introduced by faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. If you can tell me what character these traits describe, go ahead and put it in the chat box.
Superman. Superman. Everyone's putting Superman.
That is it. And isn't it interesting? With those 3 traits or characteristics, everyone came up with the same character. This was his brand. And each of you carries a brand with you, very similar to his. It's what's consistent about you. It's what people can expect from you. So as you move forth, we're going to talk about how you can create that brand out of a PSR, because this is really important. And if you're not quite sure about your traits, ask people around you. I often have my clients talk to people that they know and have them list 3 traits, which is a single word or a phrase that is descriptive of them. And then when you start to see that pattern, you'll know that that constitutes your brand. Now, you may or may not like everything that you see in the brand, but because it does have a behavioral component, you can have the ability to change that for the better. Okay, so now we've gone through these various pieces of a PSR. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move into a system for tracking accomplishments. And so if you notice, there is a template here. And it begins on the left with the trait or the skill. Then it moves into the problem, then into the solution, and then into the result. Now, an approach that you can use is to begin with the problem. You write it out when it occurs. You don't wait until you have the solution and the result. And that's easy enough for people to do because, as I said, there are usually emotional components to this so that you know when it's around you. So you begin with a problem, then you begin to generate through the ideas that we talked about in the various ways that people approach problem solving. And you come up with at least one way that you would address this. And what you want to do in this is to look at how you're going to show growth or change. And then you want to look at the result. So you take the PSR through those stages, and then you go back and you can analyze it. What traits or skills were associated with that? Or you could start with highlighting a trait or a skill that you might want to think about for an upcoming interview, and then look at problem solutions and results that support that. So in this case, the problem was that the company profits were being negatively affected and what that would mean for the future of the company. So you can see where there would be tension, stress, pressure, and fear. What you want to do at the problem stage is you want to look at who owns that problem. If it's a problem that you discovered is owned by someone else, you need to be able to pass that off to them. so that they can use their resources to move it forward. If you own any or all of the problem, then it's appropriate for you to take it through the next steps. And I've worked with clients who, after they've described the problem, they realized it wasn't theirs. And believe me, it made their life a lot easier. So in this case, the solution, which was the steps needed to be taken to address the problem, this individual came up with a marketing plan with a potential earning of $750 million in sales. So can you see here where there would be a sense of hope and relief? I like to look at the solution as the metaphor of the light at the end of the tunnel. The question is, how bright is that light and how long is that tunnel? So after applying the solution, the result was a 48% revenue growth by year's end. So you want to take a look at the impact on the company. Was it positive or negative? And we certainly know that there have been solutions that have been applied that have had a negative result. And when you look at the result, ask yourself, was there any recognition for you as part of this? Did you receive an award or a bonus? And this is certainly something that you can craft into your statement. Now, one of the challenges of putting together a PSR is quantifying. So when you're looking at the problem stage, you want to come up with a system or a way of quantifying that. And so here you want to look at metrics. You want to look at ways in which you have measured the time involved, the income, the profits, the earnings. So let's say a company was operating at $100 million a year. That was its base. And they learned that that was not enough to survive. Well, the solution based on the problem generated $360 million in income. So you want to look at whether or not that was enough to keep the company afloat. So some examples of quantifying statements are a decrease in delivery time, an increase in revenue, enrolling a specific number of clients, generating a certain number of clicks. And you can see that there are numbers attached to each of these. Where did they come from? Well, they could come from a variety of sources. They can come from forms you create, from personnel who can provide data, maybe feedback from stakeholders, or from an annual report. So let's open the chat box and see if there are other ways in which you can see gathering hard data that you can use as part of your problem.
It's open. Client satisfaction scores.
Okay.
Track number of participants in a program when you start in the position and again a year later. It's a good one.
That's a good one.
Then another one is increase in employee satisfaction.
Great. So again, you have ways in which you can measure the baseline, because it's going to be difficult to show what that growth or difference looked like if you don't have two numbers to compare. So when it's not possible for you to have words that quantify, the next best approach would be words that qualify. And these can be words like reduce, eliminate, exceed, minimize. And these types of statements might be significantly reduced delivery time, or eliminated redundant procedures, exceeded departmental goals, maintained consistent compliance. So as you see, what's missing from these are the numbers. So for instance, on the second one, eliminated redundant procedures on monthly reports, maybe what you could do is expand that and say that you eliminated 3 redundant procedures within the department exceeding annual goals by more than $1 million. So here's where you don't have an exact number in terms of the dollar amount, but you know that it was at least over $1 million. So you can be accurate on that. So again, you want to think about making these statements as specific and metrically based as possible. Certainly better than you writing in your resume, followed policies or held meetings, because the person reading this would have absolutely no idea as to how effective you were in each of these tasks. So now that we have gone through the PSR piece of this, let's look at the skills or traits that were represented. So if you notice on the left box, designing, developing, negotiating, persuading, those are skills. Drive and working under adversity would be traits. So what I'd like to do is open the chat box and have you identify other skills or traits from the PSR that we have written here. If you see it as a skill, put an S after it. If you see it as a trait, put a T after it. And after you've done that, we'll take a look at these and see what else we could come up with.
Problem solver, T.
Okay.
We have tenacity, T. Creative thinking, T.
Any skills that you can think of besides the one that we have listed here?
Managing up,
Okay.
S.
Good.
Marketing, S.
Okay.
Marketing. Oh, good communicator, S and T.
Good. Okay. What about analyzing? Would analyzing be a skill or a trait?
Skill. Could be both.
Could be both, but more likely it's a skill. Remember, when it's about analysis, it's really about development, whereas a trait would be more innate. So you want to think about if you have the trait, let's say the ability to analyze, it comes perfectly natural to you as something that was inborn, then how you use that in your life could become the skill. So typically the trait comes first, followed by skill development. So that's another way to look at this. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to our format for tracking accomplishments. And what I'd like for you to do is go back to the problem that you wrote down earlier on in today's workshop. And if it's suitable for developing into a PSR, go ahead and write it in the chat box. And then I'm going to be choosing one of them, and we're going to actually type it into the boxes and show how you could go about creating a PSR. If you have a solution that you applied and a result to go with it, that's great. Also, if there's a metric that you identified, that's terrific too, but we can always add the metrics because remember, this is just an exercise. So I'm going to open this up. All right, and now I have the ability to type. Okay. Well, there we are. Okay, so if someone has a problem, we can type it into the box.
No problems yet. Oh, here's one. Growth of organizations' membership became stagnant.
Okay.
And another one is low employee morale.
Okay. Let's do low employee morale. Okay. Now, with this one, let's visit this one a little more. So there was low employee morale. Okay, how was that showing up in terms of something that we could measure? And I'm going to say measured by So what are the thoughts that people have about a way that you could measure this?
Here's one measured by low number of deliverables and lack of deliverables or lack of deliverables.
Okay. Okay, so the problem was that there was low employee morale measured by lack of deliverables. So if you're going to show growth or change, what's a number that we can talk about with the lack of deliverables? Does lack mean that there were 0 deliverables, or that there were, what could we apply to that as a metric that would help to show growth as we apply our solution? So what are we seeing in the chat box, Cindric?
No comments yet. Here's one. Can measure number of monthly reports submitted.
Okay. So again, what's a number? And remember, I said this is the biggest challenge in writing these.
Deliverables decreased by 25% year over year.
Okay, so measured by a decrease. Of 25% annually. On deliverables. Okay. So now we have a number to work with. Okay, so let's talk about a solution or solutions that could be applied. And this is one where we can all use whatever our problem-solving approaches are to come up with some solutions that we might apply in order to make a change in that employee morale.
No comments yet.
Okay.
Streamline the process used by employees.
Okay. Any other solutions you might apply? Think about what would be contributing to low morale and what you might do about it.
Incentivize employees to increase deliverables.
Okay, incentivize. Give me back again what you had after that.
To increase deliverables.
Okay.
Again, incentivize employees to increase deliverables.
Okay. And certainly, as you look at the solution, you're going to add a lot more to that, because obviously you'll have to create a program in order to incentivize employees. So this would be the beginning stages of that. And when you applied those two different solutions, or one or the other, what was the result? What was the change from that decrease of 25%? And what effect did that have on low employee morale?
No takers yet.
No typers.
Oh. Nope.
Must be the end of a long day for everyone. Well, could we say that employee morale increased? Okay, and now we need to put a number. We had a decrease of 25% annually on deliverables. So employee morale increase measured by, we should probably want an increase. And let's put a number in there. I mean, you were really good with your solution.
%25.
Okay. So it was an increase of 25% annually on deliverables. And let's say within a 6-month period. All right. So now we've created a PSR. The problem was that there was low employee morale that was measured by a decrease of 25% annually on deliverables. So the solution that you came up with was to streamline the process used by employees and incentivize the employees to increase deliverables. The result was that employee morale increased, measured by an increase of 25% annually on deliverables within a 6-month period. So now you can see what we've done in order to make this as specific and clear a PSR as possible. Now, let's look at what we've written in our PSR and let's identify the skills or traits. So if it's a skill, put an S next to it. If it's a trait, put a T. Look at the problem, look at the solution, look at the result. What skills or traits were a part of this?
Process analysis, process improvements. These are all both S's.
What other skills or traits?
Management skills, evaluate compensation package is a skill.
Okay, evaluating compensation package.
Mm-hmm. And you have management skills.
Okay, have those two. How about team building? Any traits that you can think of?
Responsive, encouraging, empathetic.
Great. Okay, so now you can see what a form would look like completed by someone like yourself. And this was a great team effort, and I want to thank everyone for contributing and thinking through this. Okay, so before we move on, what I'd like to do is revisit our earlier question about why or what's the importance of tracking accomplishments. So if you take a look at the various columns, look at the P, the problem column. What you're going to be doing is creating these types of PSRs across the board. So you will have multiple problems that you've addressed with multiple solutions and results attached to those. What you're going to look for as you read down your problem column is what's the pattern of problems that I tend to encounter at work. So the next piece of it would be the solution. Is there a pattern to the way that I solve problems? When I look at the 7 different ways that we described in terms of how people typically solve problems, what do I see as my approach that I typically use? And you will have one that is more natural and more comfortable for you. Finally, the result. Is what I'm doing in the workplace making a positive result for the company? Then you want to look at the skills or traits. When you look at the skills, look at for instance, your top 3 skills that show up in your PSRs. When you're sitting in an interview and the interview asks you to name your 3 top strengths, you have them right there in front of you with stories to support them. With traits, again, this is your brand. This is how you function in the workplace. So this will also give you great information about your performance. And as someone was saying earlier, one way that you can also use this is, let's say they're looking at cutbacks. Can you see how having something like this can really help in terms of keeping your job in a more secure position, as opposed to someone who says, well, I think I'm really good at what I do. Well, what do you have to demonstrate that? Well, give me a chance to go back and try to construct that. You have it already in place, so you can share that immediately. So that being said, let me take us back. Oh, here we go. Okay, so there we are with our PSR, with our skills or traits attached to it. So let's look at what it was that we were hoping to accomplish today. So as a result of today's workshop, can you recognize situations in which your accomplishments are vital? Can you identify the 5 components of accomplishment statements? And can you now write a PSR? And again, when I work with clients, it is a challenge to put these together. So that's why something like this can be very, very helpful. So let me ask you in the chat box for responses to these. First of all, can you recognize situations? Let's write yes or no. See how many responses we get.
We got a bunch of yeses.
Okay, any no's?
Nope, no no's.
Great. Okay, the next question. Can you now identify the 5 components of an accomplishment statement? Yes or no?
A bunch of yeses, no no's.
Okay. Can you write a PSR now?
Continued yeses, yeses, yeses. No no's.
Okay. So it looks like we accomplished our goals in terms of the workshop. Now what I'd like to do is just open it up to questions. So if you will go ahead and write those in the chat box, we'll see what we can do to answer them.
We have a question from Morgan. Can you quickly go over the 5 components of an accomplishment statement?
Sure. So you start with the problem. The problem is the situation that you're dealing with that is creating tension, stress, fear, either within yourself or within the company. The solution is the different ways that you can come up with in order to solve that problem, to move forward, to make a change. So this will basically be the change piece of this. Okay, what will you do? What steps will you take? Remember, when you have a singular problem, you can have multiple steps in your solution, different ways that you're going to try this. And of course, you want to think through what it is that is needed in order to get to the result. So as we were looking at the situation with the morale, well, we looked at incentivizing that program. That would be one approach to doing this. And again, when you get to the solution stage, you're going to have a lot more information as you flesh out what that will look like. And then finally, in this area with the result, this is the outcome. Okay, so think of this as what you hope to accomplish. When you start with the problem, you want to have metrics whenever possible so that you can demonstrate growth and change. Those are your numbers. Your solution is your action leading to an outcome or result. Then once you've looked at your PSR, what skills did you have in place in order for that to occur? Was it analyzing? Was it writing? Was it communicating? Then what traits might have been involved? These are more descriptive as to where the others were more behavioral. So was it about tenacity, creativity, different ways that you can think of that are natural for you that you bring into this process? Remember, we generally start with a trait that becomes developed as a skill. Did that help, Morgan?
Yes, she said yes. Thank you.
Good. Another question.
We have one more question. Are there any, I'm sorry, is this something you can do for volunteer roles?
Absolutely. Actually, you can use this anywhere. For students, they can be writing their PSRs already. For people who are in volunteer situations, you can certainly write up PSRs. Any place where you want to show how your presence makes a difference. That's really what PSRs are all about. So you can even do a PSR as a group process. Think about it. You get a group of people together, you identify the problem, you generate solutions, wait for the results to occur, and then talk about the skills and the traits that were involved. And when you focus on those skills and traits, boy, that's a great ego booster for people. Wow, I didn't realize that I had that in me. So it doesn't always have to be just individual.
Then we have another question from PJ. Are there any overused accomplishments that we should avoid?
I just can't think of any, PJ, in terms of your problem is going to be unique to your setting. So the solution and the results are going to be varied. So I can't imagine even two people in the same company would approach this in the same way. Now, again, if you were working as a team, absolutely, but anything that's done individually, don't worry about there being overlap with what someone else may have come up with. So overuse should not be an issue.
Then we have another question from Jennifer. For the accomplishments that have no quantifiable validation, how do we convincingly use qualifying statements? It's a two-parter. So, and then that's the first question. And then the next part of it, if we improved employee morale, for example, but it wasn't measured, how do we back that up?
Okay, so go back to, the qualifying words: exceeded, improved, increased. And just that, as I said, that's better than worked on employee morale. Okay, so while it's not the strongest, it's certainly stronger than the more generic thing that we see on resumes and in performance evaluations. So that would be a part of it. Again, with the low morale, you might want to think when you identify that as an issue, a problem, what does it currently look like? What are metrics that can measure what it is that's happening right now? And what is our plan for making that look different in some way? So oftentimes it's about really thinking through the problem initially and what numbers you can attach to that. And when you do that, you'd be surprised at what you can come up with. Things that you thought, oh, there's no way that that can be measured. Well, we talked about surveys, employee feedback, a number of ways that you could gather that information. You could look at attrition in terms of morale. What's your turnover? And what do you want to do to change that? Does that help answer your questions?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, that was the last question that we had.
Okay, perfect. Well, yes, and I want to thank everyone for their participation today. And if you'd like further information about how to write a PSR, or you might be interested in working with me individually as a counselor and coach, this is my contact information. I do have a website, www.davidpetrovecoaching.com. You can reach me at david@davidpetrovecoaching.com or at my phone number, 650-400-7461. Thank you for your participation at the end of a long day, and don't forget to let your results do the talking.
All right. Well, thank you, David, for being able to do this workshop for us here. We're very appreciative of that. As you know, the UA Alumni Career Lab is free for all alumni to participate in as far as resume help, webinars, career counseling, career coaching. So please take advantage of that resource. And if you have any questions as well about the webinar or anything else, please feel free to contact me. The email that you received has my contact information in it, Cindric Steptoe. So look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you and have a great night. Thanks for being here.